Hey guys! Tonight we're going to spend some deeply relaxed time with an object that's been through more wardrobes than we ever will, changed fashion more than runway trends ever could, and still manages to stay mostly ignored the button. No, seriously. You're going to drift through 5,000 years of clothing design so gentle, so subtle, so absolutely unbothered by urgency that your pillow might start yawning before you do. Of course, if you think you're going to stay awake through a softly padded lecture on toggles, twisted cords, and Neolithic outfit fasteners, you probably won't, and that's exactly the point. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin on a hillside, not particularly high, not at all dramatic. The wind is gentle, the sun is low, the ground beneath your feet is firm, but the grass is tall enough to brush your knees. You walk slowly. You're not in a rush. The air carries no messages, only memory. You're in the distant past, not the regal past, not the bronze or silver age. This is before buttons, before fasteners, even before garments tried to hold together. A woman walks ahead of you, adjusting the pelt draped over her shoulders. She doesn't look up, but you can tell she's done this before. The fur slips. She gathers it, ties it again with a leather thong. There's no clasp, no stitched fold, just the logic of knots and habit. You follow her through a stand of trees, the shadows long and flickering, and you begin to see what dressing meant in the earliest times: wrapping, pinning, folding, fastening with what was available, cordage, sinew, braided fiber, bits of bone. Function guided every fold. There are no shirts, no coats, just skins and weaves. Tunics? Yes, but nothing tailored, nothing shaped to a body with a notion of style, yet there's intention. She pauses beside a low fire. Others sit there. Some wear cloaks, fastened at the shoulder with sharpened bone pins. Others have looped thongs through holes cut into fabric edges, knotting the ties across their chests like patient sailors. This isn't fashion. This is containment. The wind lifts a fold of fabric, and a boy beside you ties it down with a twist of grass. You watch the knot. It's familiar, not decorative, just effective, long before buttons were ever pressed, worn, or counted. There were closures, and before closures, there were solutions. You start to notice them, across time, across places. Ancient Egyptians used sashes, Mesopotamians used weighted hems, Minoans wore open vests held with little more than hope and posture. You pass a traveler now, seated cross-legged and adjusting a fibula, a metal pin, looped like a safety clasp, used by Romans, Greeks, Etruscans, decorative, yes, but mostly practical, holding fabric together with as much elegance as a brass hinge. You watch him reposition it. The motion is smooth, practiced, still not quite a button. Because buttons don't just sit there, they require participation. A loop, a slit, a second half of the conversation. But you're not there yet. You crouch beside a flat stone, where an old man is polishing a bit of shell. It gleams faintly, but there's no hole in it, no threads, just shimmer. You realize you're watching something decorative, not because it closes anything, but because it draws the eye. Early buttons, long before they functioned, were beads, medallions, tokens. They were worn, sewn, displayed, sometimes on clothing, often with the dead, in ancient Indus Valley graves. Archaeologists have found button like ornaments carved from shell and bone, not connected to loops, just there, like punctuation without a sentence. You hold one now. It's warm from the fire, light, smoothed by many thumbs, and utterly unconcerned with fastening anything. There's a scholarly consensus that these earliest buttons were for display, not utility. They marked status, decorated robes, signaled taste. They said, I am adorned, not I am held together. The earliest buttonholes didn't appear for thousands of years. In the beginning, buttons were jewelry, and yet, you feel the potential in your hand, this piece of bone, or shell, or stone. It could do something more. It could clasp, if only it had something to clasp into. A loop, a hole, a partner, but not yet. You stand and watch the wind lift another cloak, another braid of cord looped quickly to catch it. Every closure here is improvised, repeated, accepted. Nothing clicks, nothing snaps, nothing quite buttons. But soon, the air is slightly warmer now, as if you've stepped into a season rather than a new century. You walk alongside the shore of a long-dried lake, where grass grows in clumps between half-buried stones. Your fingers still hold the memory of a shell disc from the night before, a button that wasn't quite a button. Decorative, yes. Practical, not yet. But now, something begins to shift. In the distance, a burial site, low mounds, barely raised from the surrounding land. You approach slowly, respectfully, not out of fear, but because this part of history walks softly. Much of what we know about early buttons comes not from clothing preserved in chests or drawers, but from graves. And so here, among the hushed stones, you begin to see them, shell discs, bone circles, little knobs carved from ivory, none with thread holes, some with shanks carved directly into the back, others set into grooves of fiber, secured with resin or gut. Their surfaces are sometimes decorated, lines, dots, tiny concentric rings. None fasten anything, but they adorn. You crouch beside a burial from the Bronze Age. A figure lies curled, wrapped in a woven cloak. Along the front edge of the garment, a line of small discs, carefully arranged, each about the size of your thumbnail, each made of bone polished to a soft sheen. They're placed where buttons might go on a modern coat, but there are no loops, no slits. These were sewn flat. They weren't meant to be used. They were meant to be seen. A common find. Actually, early Bronze Age burials often show rows of buttons that follow the curve of a tunic or robe, especially across the chest. Archaeologists debate whether they marked rank, tribe, gender, or simply wealth. But the consensus, these weren't closures. They were signals. You watch a child's burial being unearthed nearby. A single disc near the collarbone. Shell, not bone, pierced in the center. One, not many, just enough to say something subtle. Even now, no one agrees on what that something was. You walk slowly along a row of unearthed dwellings, circular huts, their stone foundations like quiet outlines of old thoughts. Inside, a loom rests in permanent sleep, its weights crumbled. Next to it, a shallow basket containing spindle whorls, dyed wool, and what appears to be a small, smooth disc. You pick it up. It's slate, cold, etched with a spiral on its back. The faintest hint of a stem, a shank, possibly pressed into fabric, possibly looped onto something, possibly almost a button, but still not quite. The word button doesn't yet exist. The concept of buttoning, as a mechanical act of slipping one thing into another, is still centuries away. Yet the objects persist. India offers the next clue. You step now into the humid air of the Indus Valley, Mohenjo-Daro. Specifically, the city is busy with low walls and orderly streets. You walk past women carrying bundles of dyed cloth and men working with shell and metal. One sits at a low table, smoothing a small white disc. You pause. This one has holes. Two pierced clean through. He strings it onto a length of fiber, not to fasten, to decorate. This is perhaps one of the earliest true buttons as we know them as small. Flat disc with holes for sewing, dated roughly to 2000 BCE, found not in a robe, but in a grave, sewn into a shroud, again, not to close a seam, just to sit, to shimmer, to be there. Scholars studying these finds often remark on the consistency. Buttons appear across cultures, yet rarely serve as closures in their earliest forms. In China, in Central Asia, in Egypt, they're worn, displayed, embedded in the garment like soft punctuation. You walk now into a marketplace where a merchant strings tiny discs onto a cord, shell, bone, sometimes even metal. He sells them not as tools, but as ornaments. People wear them on the hems of sleeves, the tips of belts, the edges of hoods. A fringe theory, largely dismissed but oddly persistent, suggests that early buttons acted as talismans, worn near the heart or across the throat, tied to no belief in particular, just a feeling that something round, carefully carved, and close to the body helped. You don't know if that's true, but you're wearing one now, sewn into your shoulder seam by the woman who handed it to you with no explanation. And somehow, you feel it. The sun begins to lower. You sit at the edge of the village, next to a small girl threading her own disc onto a cord. She squints with concentration, then lifts it proudly, not centered, not symmetrical, but hers. It's a button. In the way a child's song is a song, you hold yours, bone, smooth, faintly warm from the walk. It won't close anything, but it will remain, just as it has for 4,000 years. You walk now across terrain more settled, though still ancient. Stones are stacked in walls, low but lasting. A path of packed dirt curves between structures with sun-baked bricks and roofs made of timber and thatch. Somewhere nearby, a stream moves slow and certain. You can't see it, but you can hear it, like a whispered reminder that time flows whether or not anyone bothers to mark it. You've reached the Bronze Age heartlands of Europe, and here, buttons are beginning to gleam. Not everywhere, not for everyone, but as you move through this village, you notice something has changed, not in speed, but in purpose. A man is standing at a forge, bellows moving slowly. Metal glows at the edge of his anvil, not weapons today, not tools, ornaments. He's crafting small discs from bronze, circular, a little convex, a tiny loop on the back, cast as part of the mold. When cooled, they'll be polished and sewn, not onto armor or belts, but onto clothing. And this time, not just for burial. You approach a young woman who sits in the sun with a strip of linen across her lap. She stitches a row of the bronze discs along its edge. They don't fasten anything. They don't pull fabric shut. They glint. They catch light. They turn motion into shimmer. They are, unmistakably, status in Bronze Age Europe, especially in the central and southern regions. Buttons finally step out from their funereal beginnings and start appearing in day wear, often as part of ceremonial dress or garments meant for display. They are still decorative, but they are visible now in life. You walk with the woman to a gathering, a ceremony, perhaps a procession. Others wear the same buttons, not all bronze. Some are ivory, some bone, some amber, rare and glowing in the dusk. Each button is a signal. Look closer, though, and you notice something odd even now. There are still no holes in the cloth. The buttons are stitched on top. No loops, no slits, just adornment. We are still, it seems, waiting for utility. A boy carries a folded cloak. You see it fall open, lined with 10 bronze discs, each evenly spaced. But when he wraps it over his shoulder, he secures it with a fibula, a brooch. Not the buttons, not yet. This raises the first of many open debates among scholars. Were early metal buttons intended to be used as fasteners, or did that function only emerge much later? Some argue they were worn like medals, markers of prestige, identity, or allegiance, while others believe we simply haven't found the loops. You turn now toward a market where artisans shape buttons from unexpected materials. One man polishes lignite, creating smooth black discs. Another works antler into elliptical buttons with carved patterns. You hold one. It's heavier than shell. Cool. Perfectly smooth. On its back, a loop, cast in the same piece. The front is incised with a geometric swirl, something between a sun and a spiral. You show it to the merchant. He nods, then mimes placing it on a chest, not to close, but to center. It is not a tool, it is a focal point. The Bronze Age loved display, not flash, but significance. Buttons are now companions to gold necklaces, braided belts, clasped cloaks. They belong to garments that say, I have things, and I carry them on my sleeves, and yet, you know what's coming? Not here, not yet. But soon, soon, someone will look at a button and think, what if this wasn't just an ornament? What if it worked? You step into a tomb, older than the village. Inside, amid pottery and spearheads, lies a garment preserved by dust and luck. It's edged with metal discs, not evenly spaced, not symmetrical. They trail down one side, across the hip, and stop mid-thigh. A fashion statement, perhaps, or a way to guide the eye. A fringe researcher once proposed that these buttons were used to teach patterns, to show apprenticeship through symmetry. There's no proof, but when you stand in the tomb and look at the garment, you understand the instinct, even decoration, wants purpose. You walk back into the daylight. In the distance, you see a man at work on a new tunic. He lines up small clay buttons, carefully, like seeds. Then, without comment, he pierces the fabric beside each one with a small bone tool. Loops, not holes yet, but the idea is coming. Your hand rests on your own garment, where a single button hangs from a cord loop. It doesn't do much. It keeps a fold in place. But in that one act, it changes how you move. You feel contained, secure, considered. Perhaps that was always the point. And perhaps soon, someone will cut a slit, and the button will click, and everything will quietly change. The morning begins with a breeze, light, but certain. It carries no chill, only dust stirred from flagstones and the quiet scent of wool, olive oil, and sun warmed marble. You walk through the arches of a city that seems too balanced to ever rush. Columns stretch upward, markets unfold slowly, togas drift like sails catching soft wind. You're in Rome now, not the dramatic, conquering Rome with flashing swords and shouted orations. You're in the Rome of daily drapery, the Rome where fashion, like politics, is layered. You pass a man arranging a bolt of fabric across his arm. It's white, heavy, uncut. He throws it over his shoulder, folds one side across his chest, then adjusts it under his opposite arm. No pins, no hooks, and certainly no buttons. The toga, pride of Roman fashion, did not need fasteners. It needed choreography and practice and an entire social structure to justify the amount of fabric it required. You follow the man as he joins others near a public square. Each is dressed slightly differently, some in shorter tunics, some with colorful edges, some with togas so expansive they seem to carry their own gravitational field. But none use buttons. Instead, folds, sashes, skill. Across from them, a woman adjusts her stola, a long, pleated dress worn over a tunic. She pins the shoulder with a fibula, a brooch made of bronze, looped and sharp. It fastens through a slit, catching the two fabric layers with a twist and a flick. This, too, is not a button, and yet it does the job. You lean against a column and observe the texture of Roman fashion. Everything is layered, tied, wrapped. Nothing is stitched shut. Roman garments were more architecture than attire. The body was not shaped by clothes. Clothes were shaped around the body, folded like a conversation with gravity. Buttons, in this world, would have been unnecessary, perhaps even rude. Still, small decorative discs appear here and there, on children's garments, on foreign cloaks, on soldiers' capes, but they're mostly ornamental, status indicators, nothing meant to fasten, to grip, to close. This is not a flaw, it's a philosophy. Roman culture preferred expression through material, color, and drape, not mechanical closures. They had tailoring, yes, but it stopped at seams. A good Roman garment stayed on through skill, not structure. You enter a tailor's stall near the market. Inside, lengths of dyed linen and wool hang from hooks. The tailor himself stands by a table, folding a cloak with methodical calm. You notice a box at the edge of the room, inside buttons, a few, mostly bone, some bronze, none attached to anything. He sees your curiosity, lifts one of the buttons, rolls it between his fingers, then shrugs. They're for the Gauls, he says, smiling slightly. Or the Germans. They like closure. Then he sets it back in the box. A mainstream interpretation of Roman dress is that it was intentionally fluid, designed to reflect movement, not contain it. Buttons belonged to the outer world. The empire absorbed many things, but not everything took root. You pass a soldier now. His tunic is belted, his cape pinned at the shoulder. A small disc rests beneath the pin, decorative, not functional, but clearly crafted. The leather strap below it holds firm. That's the true fastener. Yet even here, something stirs, As the empire ages, as styles mingle, more buttons appear on military and foreign dress, tunics become tighter, sleeves more fitted, fasteners more needed. In the far corners of the Roman world, Britannia, Gaul, the eastern provinces, people begin to modify garments, to add toggles, to invent closure in climates where wrapping simply isn't enough. You sit now on a low stone wall beside a bathhouse. Someone has left a folded tunic nearby, short, trimmed in blue. It has slits, not many, just a few, along the collar, a sign of change, a fringe theory, often overlooked, suggests that the decline of the Roman toga coincided with the rise of more practical closures. That as the empire shifted, simplified, fractured, people wanted clothes that stayed on without help, that moved with them through work, not performance. You walk past a statue. The marble figure wears a draped robe, expertly carved, but on its shoulder a strange detail, a small, round indentation, perhaps a button once painted there, or imagined, not real, but considered. By now, buttons exist elsewhere. They've taken root in other cultures. Grown from ornament to tool, Rome wasn't their place, but the edges of Rome. That's where they'll begin. You cross the forum, the light fading slowly, tunics sway, sandals whisper, pins catch glints of sun. But still, no buttons hold anything shut. Not yet, but soon, even folds will need help, and buttons, real buttons, will rise. Quietly, the road curves east now, away from marble columns and toward tiled roofs with curved eaves. The dust under your feet softens into packed clay. The trees look different, taller, stiller, and old in a quiet, deeply rooted way. You walk into the Tang Dynasty, China's golden age of art, poetry, trade, and subtle fashion revolutions. The first thing you notice is color. Everywhere, robes dyed in amber, cinnabar, deep teal. Fabrics float like paper in wind, silk, mostly, layered and draped with deliberate elegance. You pause near a courtyard where two women sit beneath a canopy of plum blossoms, working on a garment stretched across a lacquered frame. One woman is stitching, the other is tying a knotted loop. Beside them lies a pile of toggles, not buttons, not quite, but closer. These are frog closures, a system of loop and knot made from twisted cord, stiffened slightly, arranged in delicate spirals. They're functional. They close garments, they secure collars, they keep silk from slipping, and they are also beautiful. You watch the woman fasten a frog closure on the garment she's making. It holds with a satisfying tension, loop hugging knot, decorative, practical, and yet no buttonhole. Not yet. Some historians argue that this system, developed in early China, deserves to be called the true ancestor of the modern button and hole, but others insist it's parallel evolution, a different solution to the same quiet problem: how to keep your coat from flying open in a breeze. You walk through the city now, Chang'an, perhaps at its height. It welcomed traders from across the known world. Silk Road caravans unload spices and bronze mirrors. Jewels glint in shop windows. And among the merchants, you see variations of the frog closure used everywhere, on men's tunics, on official robes, even on soldiers' armor. The loop and knot fastener thrives here because it fits the rhythm of Tang Dynasty fashion: precise, symbolic, balanced. A button and hole might feel abrupt, an interruption. These closures curve, mimic calligraphy. They belong, and yet, in a quiet alley, a boy lifts a sleeve to show you something a cloth vest fastened with flat wooden discs, small, tied with thread through tiny holes. You squint. Each one pierces the fabric through two loops. No slits, just tension. He grins, presses one closed. It holds, and it looks very much like a button. This is where the scholarly debates begin. Some claim this is evidence that buttons, and even functional ones, emerged in China earlier than in Europe. Others argue these fasteners are part of a parallel tradition, distinct in technique but similar in spirit. The evidence is fragmentary, but the possibility hums beneath the surface. You stop now at a tailor's shop, where a row of coats hangs in careful alignment. Some are fastened with toggles, some with knotted loops, but one, tucked at the end, is closed with round wooden discs slipped through slits in the fabric. The tailor notices your gaze. He shrugs. "It's just easier," he says softly, then returns to his stitching. You sit beside him for a while, watching him carve a disc from bamboo. It takes only a few moments. He smooths the edge, pokes two small holes through the center, threads it with silk, then attaches it to a collar. You turn the fabric in your hands. The disc is small. The hole beside it is exact. And just like that, a button works. Here, perhaps more quietly than anywhere else, the idea emerges, not as revolution, as convenience. Still, it doesn't spread yet. Buttons, as we know them, don't overtake the frog closure in China. They exist alongside, in shadow, in substitution. The Tang people are not interested in replacing beauty with efficiency. They prefer things that linger, unfold a curve, but they know, and they remember, even today. Some traditional Chinese garments retain the toggle and loop system, not out of nostalgia, because it's lovely, because it works, because fashion here respects continuity. You leave the tailor's shop. The street is lit by lanterns now, their silk skins glowing softly against the evening. You pass a woman tying a child's collar closed with a twist of cord. She loops it, presses a small bead into the knot, and it holds. You keep walking. Your own robe is held with a toggle. It doesn't need to be, but tonight, it feels right. The road winds north now, past the echoes of dynasties, and through a line of trees bent low from time and frost. The land turns cooler, wetter. You feel it in your sleeves, in your breath, in the way people begin to dress. Thicker tunics, tighter cuffs, hoods that don't fall away from the wind, but hold close to the skin. Europe again, but a different Europe. The year is somewhere in the 1200s. The air is dense with wood smoke and wet wool. You walk through a narrow village lane, where thatched roofs slouch toward each other like gossiping neighbors, and you notice it before anything else. A sleeve, tight at the wrist, shaped not by a belt or a pin, but by something new, a row of buttons. You stop. They're small, round, lined along the forearm of a wool tunic. Each fits perfectly into a narrow slit, and for the first time in your journey, something clicks, literally. This is it. The moment when buttons become not just present, but functional. You walk slowly, almost reverently, toward a young woman adjusting her sleeve. The buttons are made of cloth, stuffed and stitched, with small matching loops. You ask her without words, just a gesture, and she smiles faintly, pinching one of the loops and pulling it over the button. It holds. Neatly, easily, finally, a button that closes something. The Middle Ages are not often praised for comfort, but they do give us one of the most significant turning points in clothing history, the union of button and buttonhole. Not just ornament, not just closure, but form-fitting, functional fastening, and it changes everything. You walk into a tailor's shop, ducking beneath a wooden lintel. Inside, light filters through oiled parchment windows. Bolts of wool lean in the corners. On a long table, spools of thread, bone needles, and a small bowl of buttons. Some are cloth, some wood, a few metal. Most are about the size of a coin, with 2 or 4 holes. One has a looped shank. Another is pearled, faintly lustrous even in the dimness. The tailor holds up a nearly finished doublet, close-fitting, expertly shaped. Down the front, a straight row of buttons, each matched with a tight slit. You watch as he closes them one by one. The effect is subtle, satisfying, clean. This, he murmurs, is the difference between draped and tailored. And he's right. Before buttons, clothing wrapped, flowed, layered. After buttons, it fits, it sculpts, it shapes. Historians pinpoint this transformation to 13th century Germany and France. Buttons weren't unknown before, but it was here and now that they were finally used with holes. It spread quickly, at least among those who could afford it. You walk the streets and see buttons on bodices, on cuffs, on hose, some close sleeves so narrow they couldn't be pulled on without opening. Others run from neckline to hem, transforming the silhouette of the body from column to curve. Not everyone has them. Of course, you pass a field worker. His tunic is belted, no buttons, just lacing. You pass a knight. His gambeson, a quilted armor padding, is fastened with toggles, sturdier, easier to undo in haste. But the merchant's wife, her cloak has 10 buttons, the apothecary buttons from wrist to elbow. This is more than convenience, it's innovation. A scholar once called the button the zipper of the medieval world, and while the phrase isn't elegant, the meaning is clear. It changed what people could wear, how tightly they could dress, how fashion could follow the form of a body. You sit in a chapel pew next to a man wearing a fitted tunic. You lean in slightly. His buttons are horn, carved, polished, neatly sewn with linen thread. He catches you looking, smiles faintly. 10 of them, he says, imported, and there it is. The button is becoming more than useful. It's becoming meaningful, a kind of quiet display, subtle luxury. There are still no factories, of course. Buttons are handmade, painstakingly, which means they're slow, and slow things, in a world of hierarchy, tend to be expensive. That's why most early medieval buttons are found on churchmen, noblewomen, wealthy merchants, the peasant's lace, the wealthy button. You walk through a market square, the day slipping into gray. On one side, a seamstress sells thread. On the other, a young boy sorts buttons into bull's bone, wood, pewter, cloth. He doesn't speak. He just gestures. This for sleeves, this for cloaks, this for status. You leave the square as the bell tolls for evening, and in the fading light, you look down at your own sleeve. A single button, round, horn, holding the cuff just tight enough to keep out the wind. You hadn't noticed it before, but now you understand it's not decoration, it's design, and it's here to stay. The morning light falls in stripes through narrow leaded windows. You find yourself seated in a modest hall, half manor, half storeroom. The fire burns low, more for presence than heat. Around you, the room is quiet, but not still. Women thread needles through rows of cloth. A steward counts spools of wool, and near the door, two men argue softly over yes buttons. You listen. She wore 20 buttons on her sleeves. One whispers, and not a one needed for fastening. The other replies with a sniff. Luxury for its own sake is a sin in cloth. You smile. It seems the button has now become something more than practical. It is social currency. You step out into the courtyard, where sunlight reveals what candlelight hid buttons everywhere, on sleeves, down bodices, in long tapering rows along garments that don't need to be opened, only admired. In late medieval Europe, particularly the 14th and 15th centuries, the button becomes a symbol of wealth, of refinement, of how much labor you can afford to sew into your clothes. You walk past a noblewoman in a blue gown lined with fur. Her sleeves are impossibly tight, and you count, without staring, 18 buttons running wrist to elbow, bone, perhaps, or jet, each precisely spaced. Her handmaid follows close behind, dressed simpler, but still buttoned. It's not just fashion now, it's identity. You enter a small guild workshop near the square, a button maker's shop. Inside, shelves gleam with discs of wood, horn, and brass. There are molds for casting pewter, threads of silk for covering stuffed fabric buttons. One bowl contains small, bright spheres, glass, imported. These are not merely fasteners, they are adornment. The button maker sits at his bench, polishing a round of polished mother of pearl. It catches the light like a calm lake at sunset. This one's for a bride, he murmurs. 42 down the back of her gown. She'll need help dressing. You raise an eyebrow, he shrugs. Good buttons were never meant to be practical alone. That's the truth of it now. Buttons are still useful, but they've been appropriated by fashion, by hierarchy, by spectacle. You move through town, noticing where buttons appear most, on garments that curve tightly to the form, on robes that require 2 pairs of hands to fasten, on hoods lined with gold trim, on gloves, sleeves, and boots, now ornamented with small rows of showy closures, many entirely unnecessary. It's worth remembering that this was also a time of social flux, the rise of cities, of merchant classes, of wardrobes that stretched beyond function, and buttons were the perfect tool for display without ostentation. They could be made of base materials, yes, but they could also be gold, silver, carved coral, painted porcelain, and since they were small, one could wear many, quietly. You pass a tailor pinning a customer's sleeve. These 10 won't be opened, so he says, half to himself. They're there to remind her mother she married up. He smirks. Buttons, by now, are climbing every seam. Some scholars refer to this period as the button boom, not because everyone used them, but because everyone noticed them. They multiplied, and their quantity began to speak louder than their function. There's a fringe theory that some aristocrats intentionally placed dozens of decorative buttons along inaccessible seams, down the spine, for instance, as a display of dependence. See, the buttons seem to say, I have enough wealth to require assistance dressing. You walk past a wedding procession. The groom's jacket glints with metal buttons, each bearing a family crest. His boots are fastened with polished toggles. The bride wears buttons too, fewer, but each one lacquered, stitched with care. You pause beside a boy leaning against a wall. His tunic has one button. It's carved from bone, its edges chipped, but it holds his collar tight against the wind. That, too, is a statement. You return to the manor as dusk gathers. Inside, the steward from earlier is now seated near the fire, writing by flickering candlelight. You glimpse his ledger, names, dates, numbers, but also buttons. An entry reads, Lady Marjorie, new gown, 35 buttons requested, match to gloves, no repeats. He sighs and underlines it. You leave him to his work. As the fire dims, you feel one of your own buttons loosen slightly. You reach for it, press it back through its hole. It clicks softly, nothing flashy, but enough to keep you held together. And that's all a button was ever meant to do, until someone made it speak. It's still dark when you step outside. The frost hasn't lifted. The air carries a slight echo, as if the buildings are waiting for sunlight to finish forming their shadows. You follow a narrow lane out of town, past hedges stiff with cold and stone walls stitched with ivy. Ahead, two figures move quietly, a clerk and a constable, perhaps, dressed in wool cloaks, fastened tight with long rows of buttons. Their collars are nearly identical, but one man wears 15 buttons, the other 4. Oh, they don't speak of it. But everyone notices, because now, in this new century, the button is not just a flourish, it's regulated. You've reached the era of sumptuary laws, laws that don't govern your crops, your debts, your rights, but your sleeves. You pass a shop where a woman is having her coat inspected by a town official. He runs his fingers along the hem, counting each fastener in rhythm, lips tight. She watches without expression. When he finishes, she nods. He steps back. She adjusts a single button. The rest are decorative, still within the limit. In 14th to 16th century Europe, as buttons became more widespread, governments began issuing rules about who could wear how many, made of what, sewn where. These weren't casual guidelines. They were laws with consequences. In Florence, sumptuary laws dictated not only fabric types, but also button count. In England, laws forbade cloth of gold fasteners for anyone below the rank of knight. France issued proclamations against excessive ornamentation in closures. Too many buttons could mean a fine, or worse. You watch a tailor remove a row of extra buttons from a bodice. He works quickly, nervously. His customer looks on, arms folded, as if each stitch unpicked also unpicks a little of her identity. Still, she nods. It's safer this way. You move through the market, where tradesmen wear practical tunics closed with 3 or 4 buttons, usually wood or bone, modest, allowed, but on a passing noble's coat. The buttons run in twin lines from throat to knee, small, shiny, and fully endorsed by rank. Buttons are now a form of official language. You find a copy of a local ordinance nailed to a post. The script is faded, but you can still read the rules. Cloth buttons permitted for all. Metal buttons permitted above merchant class. Gilt buttons noble rank only. Jeweled buttons restricted to titled families. No sleeve may bear more than 10 decorative closures unless worn for ceremony. You run your fingers over the ink. This isn't about function, it's about identity. You walk now toward a tailor's workshop. Inside, the master tailor is sorting through a box of commissions. One sleeve bears 20 buttons. He sighs. Ceremony. He mutters. At least she can afford the fine if someone complains. Behind him, apprentices shape buttons from horn and cloth. One young boy holds up a tiny metal disc, faintly hammered with a lion's head. Too noble, the tailor says. The boy sets it aside. Buttons have become risky, but that only makes them more desirable. Some families sew buttons on the inside of garments, hidden from public view but whispered about. Others stitch decoys, flat, stitched down buttons that cannot be fastened, just enough to suggest status, without technically violating the law. A fringe practice, known from a few household inventories, involved renting buttons for special occasions. A row of mother-of-pearl closures would be sewn on for a feast, then returned before the next church inspection. You sit at a chapel as Sunday bells ring. The congregation files in, coats closed, collars stiff, buttons faintly shining in the candlelight. A priest preaches modesty. You count the buttons on his cuffs. 12. He does not apologize. You pass through the square at dusk, where a tailor's child plays with a string of discarded buttons. They slide along the cord like beads, clicking softly as she swings them in slow circles. To her, they're not status, they're toys, possibility, freedom. You walk on at the edge of town. A widow fastens her cloak, 2 buttons only, one at the neck, one halfway down. She doesn't need more. She doesn't want more. The cloak holds. The wind passes. The laws remain. But they don't speak as loudly as they used to, because already, behind locked doors and between folded hems, buttons are beginning to shift. Soon, trade will accelerate. Factories will hum, and cloth will be cut to fit, not wrapped to hide, and buttons, freed from regulation, will multiply quietly, relentlessly, beautifully. The light today feels brighter, thinner, somehow like it's been stretched across more miles than usual. The streets are wider now, straighter, paved not just with stone, but with intent. You smell spices, unfamiliar smoke, leather, and the faint tang of salt. You've reached the age of movement, trade, exchange, empire, and with it, buttons are on the move. You stand at the edge of a dockside bazaar. Carts creak, fabrics billow, sailors shout gently, as if sound travels differently across a world that's constantly departing and arriving. Buttons. Here, no longer speak one language. They speak many. You pass a merchant from India, seated cross-legged on a patterned rug, holding out a square of silk edged with small metal buttons. They're domed, pierced, and etched with starbursts. They close nothing. They shine. They are ornaments. Yes, but they've traveled beside him. A cloth bundle from Anatolia lies partially open. Inside rows of toggles, discs, knobs, each slightly different. Some carved from boxwood, others hammered from tin. You pick one up. It has a raised back loop, shanked and elegant. Ottoman coat, he says softly. These close the chest, then close again at the sleeve. In another corner, a Dutch trader rolls open a case of European military buttons, round, standardized, stamped with insignias. They're heavier than what you've held before, denser, but more uniform, mass-made, he says. Not all of them, but many, And suddenly you realize buttons aren't just crossing borders, they're changing as they do. A fringe theory, found in an obscure account of Mediterranean port cities, suggests that buttons functioned as soft markers of diplomacy, not the object itself, but the styles, materials, even number. An Ottoman noble wearing buttons made in Venice, a Parisian dress trimmed with toggles from Delhi, quiet commerce, stitched diplomacy. You walk through a tailor's shop near the harbor. It's cluttered with fabrics from everywhere: batik from Java, brocade from Florence, raw silk from Persia. The tailor has a tray of buttons. Some are plain, others are showpieces, jade inlay, glass faceting, hand painted enamel, but not all are for sale. These, he says, lifting a flat, dark button with a copper eyelet. These are from Nanjing. Can't get many. They fasten court robes, sold only in pairs. He returns it to its velvet pocket. You leave the shop and follow the winding street up toward a town square. A woman in a Spanish jacket passes you. Her sleeves flare and buttons at the elbow, 8 tiny closures running up from her wrist. You glance, and she catches your look. Moroccan brass, she says, with no need to explain further. Buttons now ride with sailors and merchants, with scholars and consuls. They're stitched to uniforms, hung from satchels, traded in market stalls, displayed in counting houses. Their materials shift based on trade flow: coconut shell, silver, silk wrapped bone, hand dyed wood. Each culture leaves a shape. Each shape learns a new seam. You walk into a tailor's guild hall. On the wall hangs a chart, hand drawn, carefully inked. It shows the preferred button types for a dozen regions. It's not decorative, it's a reference, because the clientele now expect not just buttons, but the right buttons. A French soldier will not wear Turkish toggles. A Venetian bride will not accept horn buttons cut too plain. Yet all of these buttons are here because they've moved, and in doing so, they've reshaped how garments are built: standardized tunics in Amsterdam, fitted coats in Vienna, Mandarin collars in Canton, now buttoned with imported beads because someone liked how they looked. It is no longer about whether a button is practical or ornamental. It is about how far it's traveled. A child near a vendor holds up a button she found in a discarded scrap of fabric, its mother of pearl, chipped on one side. She turns it in the light, squints, and pockets it, not because she needs it, because it has value, not cost, value. You walk back to the water's edge as the sun begins to lower. A man loads bolts of wool onto a flat boat. Another stacks crates of brass buttons marked with British military crests. You don't need to ask where they're going. Everywhere, because now the button has crossed oceans, not as cargo, but as expectation. You step off a train now, not a ship, and the platform beneath your feet hums slightly from the weight of steam and steel. The air smells of coal, ink, and wet wool. There's noise in the distance, but none of it urgent. Just the steady rhythm of a world turning faster than it used to. The year is somewhere in the 19th century, and buttons, like people, have entered the machine age. You walk into a button factory, not a palace, not a guild workshop, but a factory. It clatters, not loudly, just constantly. Rows of long benches stretch from wall to wall. Young women sit in aprons, their fingers quick. Some guide cloth-covered buttons through a press. Others feed long sheets of shell into a metal punch. It hisses, clicks, and another round. Perfect button falls into a tray. You pick one up. It's warm from friction, pearly, thin. You hold it to the light. Mother of pearl, the gleaming inside layer of mollusk shells, has become the button material of choice, especially in places like Birmingham, England, and Muscatine, Iowa. Factories import the shells by the ton. Rivers are combed, coastlines harvested, the buttons punched, polished, sorted by size and shine. One shell might yield 50 buttons, 50 shirts, 50 quiet closures, each one exactly like the last. That's the change you feel here. Not just more buttons, identical ones, before the Industrial Revolution. Every button bore the mark of its maker, a chip in the glaze, a slightly crooked shank, a thread angle that said this was made by hand. Now, the differences vanish. Uniformity becomes the style. You leave the factory floor and walk into a storefront. On the wall behind the counter, cards of buttons, neatly sewn into rows. Wood, glass, shell, even early metal alloys. Each card labeled by size, use, and cost. Working buttons, the clerk says, pointing to the practical dark ones for coats and trousers. Display buttons, she adds, gesturing to the ornate glass ones with gold foil centers, used for women's dresses, especially on bodices that don't need closing at all. And for collars, these, she says, lifting a tray, tiny discs, hard to handle, but perfectly round. Fashion in the 19th century loves buttons. Women's gowns now have dozens down the back. Men's waistcoats boast entire rows. Children's shoes are buttoned high, snug against the ankle. Coats use fabric-covered buttons to match their every layer. And with mass production, everyone can have them. Not just nobility, everyone. A clerk, a factory girl, a seamstress's son, all wear buttons now. Mainstream historians often note that the rise of the middle class in this era coincided with the democratization of the button. That's no accident. When you can buy a jacket with 18 matching fasteners, you're no longer dressing for need, you're dressing with possibility. A fringe theory, rarely cited, but oddly poetic, suggests that buttons gave people a sense of control, that choosing to close something cleanly, neatly, predictably, was soothing in a world that was spinning faster every year. You leave the shop. The street outside is quieter than expected. Women walk in bustled skirts, fitted with long lines of covered buttons. A boy in a sailor coat fiddles with his collar. A man lights a pipe beside a shop window, his overcoat buttoned all the way to the chin. No one remarks on the buttons. They're invisible now, omnipresent, essential. You board another train as evening falls. The seat beside you holds a newspaper. Its front page lists stock prices, war rumors, ship schedules, but beneath your hand is something quieter. The jacket seam, 5 buttons, shell, probably. You close one. It slides into the hole like it was made to do so, which it was, probably in a factory half a continent away. You don't know who made it. You don't need to. That's the world you're in now, and the buttons they've kept up. The wind is stronger now, not wild, just assertive. It cuts down narrow city streets lined with gas lamps and brass door handles, rustling paperboys' caps, and the long coats of men who walk with purpose, collars high. You're standing on a curb in the early 20th century, somewhere between empire and industrial rhythm, between cavalry and cable cars, and everywhere you look, buttons march in lines. Uniforms, they're everywhere. not just on soldiers, on train conductors, firemen, postmen, elevator operators, police, bellhops, factory foremen. Each role comes with a coat, and each coat comes with buttons, stamped, shined, perfectly placed. You walk alongside a young man in navy wool. His greatcoat bears 2 rows of brass buttons, each polished until they glint like the idea of discipline. He carries himself with precision, partly because the buttons demand it. They are not just fasteners, they are signals. You pause and lean close. Each one is embossed with a crest, a crown, an anchor, crossed rifles. You count 12 down the front, 6 smaller ones on the cuffs, and 2 decorative at the back, not for function, for symmetry. That's how deeply buttons are woven into the military aesthetic. They don't just close the coat, they shape how the body is seen. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, uniform design becomes a codified art, and buttons are standardized with remarkable specificity. Military regulations dictate not only the number, size, and placement of buttons, but also their symbols. Brass, silver, blackened steel. You could identify rank, division, and even nationality by the glint on a man's chest. You pass a tailor's shop that serves officers. Inside, a chart hangs on the wall diagrams of service coats, each with annotated button placements. It reads like architecture, 12 millimeters from seam, spaced 4 centimeters center to center, embossed with regimental insignia only. The tailor doesn't ask what style you want, he asks your rank. That's the language now. Buttons are not simply sewn, they are issued, so you move down the block and enter a department store. In the women's section, you see another kind of uniform emerging: the smart tailored suit. Lapels, cinched waists, pleated skirts, and buttons, lots of them, covered in matching cloth or made of bakelite in the newest shades navy. Jade, smoky pearl. The factory aesthetic has crossed into fashion. Everything is tidier, more symmetrical, buttoned up. A seamstress adjusts the cuffs on a store mannequin. Her basket holds at least 30 buttons. She's not just sewing closures, she's constructing the illusion of order. In a world where cities grow louder, where political lines blur and reform moves faster than rail schedules, the act of fastening yourself into something structured becomes its own form of comfort. A child tugs at his mother's coat, pointing at a row of buttons on a nurse's uniform. They're stark, white, sharp as punctuation. He imitates the walk. You smile, even in peace. Buttons carry command. You follow the crowd into a theater that evening. The ushers wear red velvet coats with brass buttons shaped like lyres. The coat check woman has 7 tiny shell buttons on her vest. The audience rustles in woolen crepe, buttoned tightly against the night. You notice now how buttons move with ritual. A coat buttoned slowly means arrival, unbuttoned relaxation, rearranged halfway through the second act, discomfort. Buttons have become choreography. There's a debate, ongoing among historians of design, about how much buttons influenced military hierarchy or merely reflected it. Some argue the regimentation of appearance shaped behavior. Others insist it merely codified it, but all agree once uniforms became buttoned, the rest of fashion followed. You return to your hotel room. The bellhop removes his cap and unbuttons his jacket with practiced ease, 2 at the top, 1 near the waist. The coat hangs open like a curtain call. You thank him. He nods, His sleeve button shines. Later, you unfasten your own buttons. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's slower than a zipper. It asks something of your hands, but each click out of place is satisfying, like undoing a line of thought at the end of a long day. You lay the coat aside. Its buttons reflect the lamplight like a quiet row of sentinels. They'll wait. Tomorrow, they'll close again, and you'll move through a world where structure is stitched, not with wire or command, but with tiny, round symbols of decision. The hallway you enter now smells like dye, paper, and lacquer. Light filters through glass blocks, soft and industrial. You've arrived in the middle of the 20th century, where color has come to stay. You pass a bulletin board covered in sewing patterns. A radio hums quietly in the corner. Someone is singing under their breath in the next room, and on every surface, in every drawer, there are buttons, but something is different. They're brighter, smoother, lighter in the hand, plastic. You pick one up from a scattered pile on a workbench. It's round, cream-colored, slightly translucent, with 4 clean holes and a uniform edge. You pick up another, deep green, slightly marbled, shaped like a tiny gear. These are bakelite, celluloid, later, acrylics, and nylon, the materials that shaped the mid-century. The moment plastic buttons arrive, fashion opens up like a drawer unlatched too fast. Mass production becomes not just cheaper, but expressive. You walk into a department store now, 1950s, maybe early 60s. Coats hang in coordinated lines, rows of blouses sit neatly folded, and everything has buttons, not as luxury, not as signal, just because. Children's school uniforms have them in bright reds and cheery yellows. Men's shirts come with neat plastic buttons dyed to match their pale pastel fabric. Women's dresses boast novelty fasteners, hearts, flowers, cubes, some even spin. A clerk holds up a sample board, 40 buttons in every color, labeled by catalog number, color matched, she says, or contrast, depending on the mood. It's no longer about function or status. It's about mood. Buttons are no longer precious. They're playful. They're prolific. You can afford to lose one and sew on another. You sit in a kitchen, flipping through a sewing magazine. One page features fabric swatches, the other button suggestions. Match your buttons to your lipstick, one caption reads. You don't smile, but your brow lifts. There's something oddly soothing about a time when matching lipstick and closures counted as daily triumph. The rise of the plastic button is deeply tied to the mid-century boom in home sewing. Women sit at Singer machines, adjusting hems, aligning darts, and selecting buttons from tins passed down through families. You open one now, a round biscuit tin, its bottom rusted. Inside, hundreds of buttons, some loose, some still attached to clipped corners of old shirts, each one a memory. Your fingers pass over 4-hole and 2-hole, shank and snap, one shaped like a daisy, one like a pearl that never lived in the sea. A fringe theory floated once in a 1978 textile journal claimed that plastic buttons, more than any other domestic object, represent the post-war democratization of design, that these little circles of color were often the only decorative choice women could make in a world still ruled by templates and price points. Maybe that's an overstatement, maybe not. You stand at a laundromat door as a woman stitches a new button onto a child's coat. The old one cracked, cheap plastic, brittle in the cold. She hums as she sews. I'll reinforce this one, she says aloud to no one. The act is gentle, defiant. You walk through a high school hallway now. Rows of cardigans, button-down shirts, sweater vests, some store-bought, some clearly homemade. Each student fidgets, fiddles, adjusts. Buttons become part of the nervous rituals of adolescence, twisting them, popping them open, aligning them again. You pause near a classroom where a teacher adjusts her blouse. The top button is undone, deliberately, a fashion choice, a shift. As the century moves on, buttons will also become a tool of statement, of suggestion, of slow rebellion. In the 60s, coats shrink, collars rise, buttons begin to vanish, hidden plackets, minimalist designs. In the 70s, they return, wide lapels, flared sleeves, huge round button in plastic, leather, even macrame. They never disappear, they only adapt. You exit into the evening, in your pocket a spare button, saved from a tag. You'll probably never use it, but it came with the shirt, just in case. And that's the truth of buttons now. They're so present, they've become invisible until you need one, until one falls off. And suddenly, you realize how much has been held together by these quiet circles of color and click. It's quieter now, not in volume, but in presence. The edges are softer. The streets blur slightly as you walk them. The decades have ticked forward into the late 20th century, and buttons, once symbols, signals, and statements, are starting to let go. You stand in the middle of a clothing store, 1990s, perhaps. Fluorescent lights buzz faintly overhead. Racks of clothes roll on metal wheels, and everywhere you look, there's movement. Zippers, Velcro, elastic. Fast fashion has arrived, and buttons. Buttons are still here, but less loud. You lift a sweatshirt from a hanger, no buttons, just cotton, elastic at the wrist, comfortable, familiar. You pick up a windbreaker, nylon, bright blue, zippered, with a Velcro cuff. A small snap button holds the collar closed, more for shape than function. You walk to a stack of jeans. Here, buttons hold on, metal ones, engraved, solid, branded. The top one is functional, the rest decorative. Manufacturers have realized they can sew false buttons over zippers, or use two, stitched permanently shut, just to give the illusion of tradition. You wander to the children's section, bright t-shirts with cartoon characters, elastic waistbands, Velcro shoes, no buttons, because buttons take time, time to fasten, time to teach, time to lose, time to replace, and time. In the world of mass-produced wardrobes and globalized design, is suddenly expensive. You enter a sewing supply aisle. The shelves still hold button cards, but fewer than before. The designs are simpler now, uniform shapes in rows of 4 or 5, plastic mostly, packaged to blend. The novelty buttons still exist, ladybugs, teddy bears, stars, but they feel like relics. A woman stands nearby, holding 2 options, one white, one off-white. She picks the off-white. It'll be close enough. You pass a teen trying on a jacket in the mirror. It has snaps, not buttons. They're easier. You hear him mutter, better than fiddling with those little round things. He shrugs, moves on. Buttons are fading, not vanishing, just quieting. Mainstream fashion begins favoring minimalism, seamless designs, invisible plackets, wrap dresses tied with sashes, knitwear that pulls on in one motion. You sit in a cafe and look around. Coats are still buttoned, shirts still have collars, but there's less variety, fewer choices. The average button in 1998 looks suspiciously like the one in 1972, standardized, streamlined, shrinking. A scholar once said that buttons, like cursive, would never be gone but might no longer be learned. You open a book on garment design published in 1991. A chapter on closures includes one short section titled Buttons Traditional. Underneath, a diagram, 2 holes, 4 holes, a shank, then snaps, hooks, elastic loops. The book moves on quickly. You turn the page. You visit a thrift shop next. Rows of second-hand clothes. Here, buttons survive because clothes from before 1985 were built to be mended. You run your hand down a cardigan, 13 mismatched buttons, replaced over time. One is ceramic, one is shell, one is plastic from a toy. Possibly it holds. In the back corner, you find a tin. It's heavy. You open it. Hundreds of buttons, all collected, saved, organized by no one but memory. Some still have thread. Some carry pieces of old shirts. Some haven't been used in decades. You smile, because this is what buttons have become. Not just fasteners, but archives, fragments of past utility, past style, past effort. A fringe designer in 1995 once staged a runway show using nothing but reclaimed buttons. Thousands of them, sewn into jackets and skirts and gloves. The reviews called it nostalgic, an homage to patience. You step back into the street. Your jacket has 5 buttons. You close one. That's enough. Buttons don't need to lead anymore. They follow, quietly, waiting, and, when needed, still capable of holding everything together. The world around you buzzes now, not with noise, but with connectivity. The storefronts glow behind smooth glass. Clothing arrives in boxes, not bags. Hangers give way to folded parcels. You're standing in a minimalist boutique, somewhere in the 21st century, where every edge is clean and every color carefully chosen. You lift a shirt. There are no buttons, not hidden ones, not covered ones, just a soft fold where a placket might have been. It's intentional. Modern fashion has discovered the art of removal. You turn to another rack: turtlenecks, pullover knits, stretch fabric tunics. All slip on, nothing fastens, nothing clicks. Because in a world of fast dressing and one-click orders, buttons are sometimes seen as friction. You run your fingers down the seam of a blazer. At the cuff, 4 buttons, neatly spaced, none functional. They're sewn directly through the sleeve. False buttons. The term feels too harsh. They're decorative, nostalgic, maybe, holding space for a gesture people have stopped performing. In this century, buttons have entered their ornamental phase. Some are aesthetic nods to tradition. Others serve only to balance the silhouette. But even as their function declines, their history deepens. You enter a design studio now. On a mood board, photos of antique military coats, Victorian gowns, utilitarian workwear, all buttoned. Next to it, sketches of modern garments, boxy shirts, minimalist collars, long-line jackets. The buttons are gone, but the influence remains. Buttons slow things down, the designer says. Sometimes that's good, but not always. She lifts a sample garment, no closures at all, just a seam that gives, and another that doesn't. Yet in a drawer at the back of the studio, she keeps a button box. Old ones, collected, saved. Sometimes, she says, they sneak their way back in. You move through the studio into a room filled with racks of designer pieces. One wool coat stops you, a single button at the neck. Large, dark, understated, so it serves a purpose. But more than that, it gives the coat structure. It offers an anchor point. You press it closed. The garment transforms, not dramatically, just correctly. That's what buttons do now. They create small shifts, quiet emphasis. You sit in a subway car. People around you wear cardigans, hoodies, tech fabric shells. Buttons appear in small ways on the shoulder of a work shirt, at the cuff of a blouse, stitched onto the side of a cap. No longer required, but remembered. Fashion historians now refer to buttons as heritage details, a kind of design shorthand for craft, patience, permanence in a digital world. They represent something analog. You walk into a collector's convention, a quiet hall filled with tables and magnifying glasses. People lean over velvet pads, displaying trays of buttons from every century: horn, glass, tin, silk wrapped, ivory. Some are tiny, some the size of your palm. They are labeled not by price, but by story: Civil War nurse uniform, Art Deco bakelite, 19th century morning dress. Each button is a sentence. You pause beside a woman sewing a small glass button onto a linen blouse. Her hands are steady. Her thread is gray, barely visible. She knots it once, twice, snips. She's not repairing. She's remembering. A fringe exhibition in Berlin once displayed buttons as artifacts of interruption, each one asking the wearer to pause, press, align, fasten. A moment of attention. In an accelerating world, you return to your apartment. Your closet holds both: buttonless tech wear, sleek and fast, and an old denim shirt, its cuffs frayed, its buttons mismatched from years of small repairs. You slide it on. Each button feels familiar, not just to your fingers, to you, because no matter how fashion changes, some closures never fully close. They wait, they rest, and when called, they hold. The light in this room is quiet. It doesn't shine. It just settles across a wooden table, a ceramic bowl, the faded lid of an old tin. You're seated in a place that doesn't exist on a map, somewhere between now and memory. The room has no windows, but it isn't dark. It simply holds time carefully, like a keepsake. In front of you, a box of buttons, not new ones, not sorted, just buttons. They rattle softly when you lift the lid, hundreds of tiny shapes and textures tumbling into one another. You scoop some into your palm. Some are chipped, some scratched. A few gleam, surprisingly bright, as if refusing to forget their shine. A four-hole plastic disc, milky and common. A wooden button with a burn mark on the edge. A brass shank with an ornate crest, rubbed smooth. Each tells a story without trying. This box, like so many others in kitchens, basements, and sewing rooms, is not organized by purpose. It's curated by chance. Saved buttons from coats long donated, shirts long worn through, baby cardigans outgrown, wedding dresses passed down. You turn one over and find thread still clinging to its back. It hasn't been sewn again, but it's been kept. That's where buttons live now, not only in fashion, but in family memory, in the bits of life too small to throw away. You glance around the room and realize buttons are still everywhere, on your sleeve, holding the cuff just close enough, on the pillow beside you, closing the cover your grandmother stitched, on the soft cardigan draped across the back of a chair, one button missing, and still perfectly wearable in an age of magnetic closures and smart textiles. The button remains humble, quiet, and quietly irreplaceable. You walk slowly now through your own closet, a dress shirt, 6 white buttons down the front, a flannel, one darker than the others, replaced years ago with a match that wasn't quite right, and never changed again, a coat, buttons nearly the size of coins, with thick thread anchoring them into fabric worn smooth by winters. You pause at a denim jacket. The metal buttons bear the brand's name. One is loose. You press it with your thumb. It holds. You sit at a table, a needle in one hand, a button in the other. You don't need to sew it back on tonight, but you do, not out of necessity, out of rhythm, out of care. A scholar once wrote that buttons are one of the last hand-fastened details left in daily life, that even as we automate and streamline, there remains something quietly powerful about slipping one thing through another and feeling it stay. You set the jacket aside. The room around you dims, not because it's night, but because things are coming to rest. And now, the last button has been fastened, or maybe unfastened. You're not quite sure which, but either way, the journey is complete. Not dramatic, not dazzling, just long, familiar, layered like the folds of an old coat hung gently by the door. Tonight, you've wandered through millennia of closures, bones and toggles, gold and pearl, plastic and glass. You've seen buttons not only as tools, but as symbols, rituals, whispers sewn into fabric by hands long gone. You've watched buttons travel with emperors and soldiers. You've seen them hoarded by seamstresses, counted by clerks, worn by kings, and you've felt their slow, quiet shift from necessity to decoration to nostalgia to comfort. And here, at the edge of sleep, what remains a circle, a loop, a pause. Maybe there's a button in your home right now, on a cushion, a pocket, the back of a book bag. Maybe you never notice it, or maybe you reach for it in moments that ask for a little closure. Tonight, as you drift further from waking, let yourself feel the shape of one small, ordinary thing that has held so much. A button, nothing urgent, nothing loud, just one soft point of connection, one thread through time, one moment that holds. You are safe now. The fabric of your day has held. Your seams are strong enough, and there's nothing left to fasten, not until morning.